I'm Max Keiser. Welcome to Max and Stacy Report. So much happening on the global scale. Let's check on Stacy.
Hey, Max. Well, you know what? We've been in the middle of a global fuel crisis thanks to what some are calling World War III these days. But, it wouldn't be World War III without a financial crisis, also fueled by bankers. Last week, as we reported, there was quite a bit of turmoil in the UK bond market and the UK currency. The sterling fell almost 5% in one night. Well, here's an excuse from BlackRock, the biggest, I guess, investment fund in the world. And this is what they said about their role in it. They said BlackRock executive defends pension strategy that fueled a UK crisis. Liability-driven investing hit by, quote, turbulence from policymakers, says corporate strategy chief. This was Mark Weidman, and he blamed their liability-driven strategy, going off the rails because of policymakers and their tax cuts that surprised the markets.
Right. So a few things. Number one, the response by policymakers in the UK, the Bank of England getting involved, essentially was a bailout for BlackRock. And this reminds me back, when Gordon Brown was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and he stole 300 tons of gold on behalf of the British people to bail out Goldman Sachs at that time. And here you have the Bank of England once again stepping in and bailing out a big Wall Street player. In this case, it's BlackRock. And the strategy, whatever strategy they're using, I can tell you that number one, it uses derivatives in a reckless manner. And every time derivatives are used recklessly, there is a crisis, there's a failure, there's a counterparty issue, and they need a bailout. But the bankers over at BlackRock or the bankers at Goldman Sachs get paid on the volume of deals, not whether or not the deals make any sense or make any money. It's all deal volume. Volume pays. They typically make huge mistakes, and then they get bailed out. Then they get another payday. So it's in their best interest to just be as reckless as possible.
Right, because many pointed out that Chancellor on brink of third bailout for banks. Of course, when the crisis was looking like it was going to be centered on the UK, perhaps it might be on Credit Suisse or Deutsche Bank. And next week, who knows? But the point is that we were having a crisis again caused by bankers and the derivatives products. Back in 2008, and when Satoshi Nakamoto printed the Bitcoin white paper on October 31st, and then, of course, the first block was mined on January 3rd, 2009. It was Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. So here at that time, it was caused by what was called, remember, CDOs. That was the word of the year, collateralized debt obligation. Now they're calling it liability-driven strategy. So there's always a new word for whatever the risk they have piled on to the global system. And as you point out, they received a bailout in this situation. BlackRock, of course, is entering the Bitcoin game, and wait until they find out that there's no bailout available in Bitcoin.
No, you make a good point there. The names of these products change all the time, but the underlying reckless derivatives composition of the products is the same. It reminds me of that scene in the great TV show in America called The Wire, where you see the peddlers of heroin would go around the street and call, hey, I got your WMDs, I got your WMDs. And every week or so, they would change the name of the heroin. It doesn't change the fact that it's basically the same heroin and it's killing people. Here you have Wall Street selling derivatives. They're the same derivatives. They're over-leveraged by 100, 200%. They're underlined by nothing except counterparty risk that's insured by bankrupt insurance companies. And it results always in the same thing, financial death. So nomenclature is important because it makes it easier to sell stuff to unwitting pension fund managers. In the case of the UK, their pension funds were under threat because the manager of those particular funds was completely incompetent, as almost anyone who runs a pension fund is incompetent. It's the very definition of what's called dumb money. The entire financial world is divided into smart money and dumb money. BlackRock and Goldman Sachs are smart money. They get paid no matter what. Pension funds typically are dumb money, and they're called dumb money on Wall Street, and those guys always end up eating a bag of worms.
Well, speaking of eating a bag of worms, of course, World War III is also not possible without a global beggar thy neighbor policy that was, of course, part of the global turmoil that led to all that period of World War I and II that we know. And now we have another global beggar thy neighbor policy. Partly it always arises to that moment, right? Because of the global setup with an all fiat currency of the US dollar. The situation is that the debts pile up in the US, inflation spirals, they need to raise rates, that causes the dollar to spike, and then all the global debts around the world, but also the developing countries, of course, their fragile currencies start to wobble and hyperinflate, and we see the crises that we see unfolding in Sri Lanka, Pakistan, where they can't get, goods like oil or natural gas, which is now because a huge swathe of the market is unavailable, it's sanctioned. But on top of that, the dollar is sanctioned in a way effectively because there's a lack of liquidity because everybody wants dollars. So they're all rushing to buy these dollars. So we have a situation where, a lot of the third world, developing world is hungry right now. So into the fray, into this mix runs the UN. Well, the UN calls on Fed, other central banks to halt interest rate increases. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development warns that the Fed further increasing interest rates can cause significant harm to developing countries. UNCTAD estimated that the Fed's rate increases so far this year would reduce poor countries' economic output by $360 billion over 3 years. As a result, this number will only rise with an additional rise in inflation.
Right. As we've been saying now for a number of years, there's two policy errors you can make. One is your interest rates are too high. The other is your interest rates are too low. Now, where was the UN 10 years ago, 5 years ago, when the central banks were coordinating a massive downtick in interest rates, even into negative territory, and moving trillions of dollars out of the pension accounts and savings accounts of mom and pop, of average people and the working class to fuel the bailout of the financial speculators on Wall Street? Where was the UN during that financial crisis that caused trillions of dollars worth of damage? Okay, suddenly in 2022, interest rates are high, and they're saying, oh, what about all this damage from the artificially high interest rates? Here's a message to the UN. Shut the central banks down completely if you want to eliminate these problems, and let the market decide, as it had been doing before central banks were invented. That's the solution.
Well, part of the issue is they're complaining about the end of a 50-year bull market and bonds. And this is something that, our show has been there for almost half of it, right? And the thing is that a lot of people out there won't know and understand is what that means. Like, interest rates were going down for the past 50 years, close to 50 years, down. And so all of that debt could keep on being rolled over and over and over. Once you hit the zero bound, which we did because of the last global financial crisis caused by the last fancy word called CDO, credit default swap. But they could get away with doing that, right? For the past 50 years, because they could always repackage it into a new product with a new title, like this new latest one called liability derivative product.
That's exactly right. It's repackaging of the same garbage and calling it something new.
Yes. So, so they've been able to do that for 50 years. And now, because you hit zero, you reached a point where certainly the US couldn't go further. Germany, the rest of Europe could, because they didn't have the dollar, right? They had the euro, and they could trash their euro, they could trash their banks, and they had industry. Well, the US couldn't do that. They couldn't break the buck. They couldn't go under it. So we reached this point that was inevitable. It was always going to happen. Now, the question is, of course, as we reach this point, and as interest rates were at 0% at the beginning of this year and are over 3% now, that's a huge jump. 3% still sounds tiny, right? But it's like, that's a huge move, thousands of percent move sort of thing that you're jumping that far. So the question is like, because our show has been around for so long and we've discussed this with so many brilliant guests for so long that they've been predicting the end of the bond bull market and the beginning of a bear market. So the question is like, will they turn to rolling it up into an SDR, into a global fiat currency? Will they roll it up into a CBDC run by the US? Like, what will they do next? Because obviously they have to roll it up into something if they want to maintain this sort of system of a debt-based system like this. Otherwise, obviously the people are going to go to Bitcoin.
Right. I think it's a good point. And I think the answer is if the United Nations is suddenly making comments about central bank policy, then they're telegraphing that there's going to be a global roll-up of some type.
Yes.
We talked about the special drawing rights. Jim Rickards was talking about this for a number of years, but now they have the CBDC, the central bank digital currency, which is the more likely go-to. So there'll be a global coin. It'll be $100 trillion or $200 trillion credit facility. All the bad debt on all these central banks all over the world, including the euro, will be rolled into this new CBDC, a global bank. The United Nations obviously seems to think that they're going to have a role in all of this. And it'll be another kicking the can down the road. But one thing is for sure, and that is that it will be inflationary. And so the misery caused by inflation is about to go hyperbolic.
And everybody, as I pointed out, was referring back to the 2008-2009 crisis, Chancellor on brink of second bailout for a bank. Now it's Chancellor on brink of third bailout for a bank. I think it'll be this CBDC because, of course, when Jim Rickards was predicting an SDR roll-up, he didn't realize at that time how big Bitcoin would be. And in fact, he was against Bitcoin. But the thing is that we predicted a few years ago is that it will happen over a weekend, just like what we saw back in 2008, 2009. Because remember, in 2008, early 2008, was when Bear Stearns collapsed. And that was that weekend 75 basis point rate cut by Ben Bernanke on a weekend. So on Monday morning, banks opened and it was chaos and gold was spiking. And you and I were at the Bundesbank actually in Germany that morning for a meeting, and there was chaos. It became a big story because we released some of the audio we were recording of them talking about they didn't even know if the markets would survive.
Well, in 71, they called it the Nixon shock.
Yes.
Because he suddenly said, America's going to close the gold window. So I agree with you. It'll happen suddenly over the weekend, and then we'll be in a new global CBDC world, and the UN apparently will be running the finances. Okay, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, much more coming your way. Oh, hi, I'm Max Keiser, and this, of course, is Plucky. I got a new job. I'm now Plucky's trainer. We're doing some of these sit-ups here. He wants to get as strong as possible for the fiat money apocalypse.
That's right, Max. We're about heading into the fiat money apocalypse, and I'm stacking sats over Swan Bitcoin.
Oh, that's so smart, Plucky. How did you get so smart? Get the Swan app. Welcome back to Max and Stacy Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Noor of Galoy. where she runs partnerships and is the co-organizer of Adopting Bitcoin, one of the best Bitcoin conferences in the world, held here in San Salvador from November 15 to 17. Noor, welcome.
Hello, thank you.
All righty. Now, great to see you. Adopting Bitcoin, a lightning summit in El Salvador. Tell us about the conference. When is it? Why is it?
Yeah, I guess the original idea started last year with a group of Bitcoiners, including the team from Galloy, who realized there was a dire need for a conference here in El Salvador, given that it's the first country to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. And so after a few meetings with a couple of banks, with the CEO of Galloy, Nicholas, he realized, well, we need to do this. We have to do this. And since we're already here, we're already on the ground, might as well host this event. So we did. And luckily, Bitcoiners being the amazing people that they came from all over the world. We had about 500 people, 700 actually, 30 different countries that came to see for themselves what's going on down here, how is the adoption of Bitcoin is going, and how they can contribute to it and help it succeed. And so because we had so much support, we decided to do it again this year, because it is important to kind of see how things have evolved a year after the adoption, a year after the law. And this year, we're not so much focusing on the Lightning aspect as much as we are on the adopting Bitcoin aspect. So we're covering topics from top-down adoption and bottom-up adoption, which is very unique to El Salvador, right? We have the El Zonte initiative with Bitcoin Beach, Chimbera, Mike Peterson, Jorge, et cetera, and the team. And we have the decision of El Salvador to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. So we still have so much to learn from this experience, from their first steps in that journey. And that's why we're doing it again here this year.
Right. So it came out of this idea where there was still a lot of misinformation in terms of Bitcoin versus crypto. A lot of people use those words interchangeably. In the U.S. and the U.S. media, they tend to group these together erroneously. There's Bitcoin and then there's crypto. Even in the political class, Senator Lummis of Wyoming will refer to crypto and kind of also include Bitcoin with Ethereum somehow, or it's similar in some way. They're not. One is a decentralized protocol that's suitable for a monetary standard that can be part of a country's reserves. The other is centralized garbage, similar to XRP, which I think spurred the conversation with you folks over at Galloy. It's centralized garbage. It's not suitable for anything. And so this education curve needs to be really, really brought to the fore. And I like the way you're describing it. There's bottom up, top down. So bottom up would be Bitcoin Beach, El Zonte, the pupusa seller, able to finally have access to a bank account. And then the top down, you've got the country making Bitcoin legal tender. And I guess at some point, these two kind of meet somewhere, or they meet somewhere right now. But I guess actually at the moment, they don't meet quite yet. I think do you see what I'm getting at here? In other words, it's the explosion of Bitcoin adoption it's coming from two different directions. Like building the Pacific and the railway system. They came from two ends, then they met somewhere in the middle with a golden spike. So this Bitcoin spike joining the top and the bottom, this is what's being built, right?
Yeah, correct. It's what drove the adoption of Bitcoin here to begin with, right? Like the reason why they decided to adopt Bitcoin in El Salvador is because 1/3 of Salvadorans live abroad and 25% of their GDP comes from remittances. And so they adopted it because these remittances go to the people that are not necessarily the poorest of the poor, right? So they need the money and they need it now. And yet over $400 million was being cut from them, right? And so to make sure that these people are supported, they made Bitcoin legal tender, and they made it mandatory to accept Bitcoin. But even though it's not enforced, but it's still something to keep in mind when thinking about why they adopted Bitcoin and why the government decided to adopt Bitcoin to begin with. It is to help Salvadorians that need a different infrastructure to be able to support themselves and their family and that rely on remittances. And so that's why they've been very collaborative, I think, or very they listen a lot to the Bitcoin community. They listen to what the people suggest. They've listened to the volcano mining idea. They've listened to the bonds idea. They're really attentive to what's going on, and they were attentive to what was happening in Bitcoin Beach and El Zonte. And now we're seeing it little by little taking over the entire country and transforming lives little by little.
Right. Paso a paso.
Yeah,
as
exactly.
the president likes to say. You know, he was tweeting about Bitcoin back in 2017.
Yeah.
He was, I believe, mayor of San Salvador at that time.
Yeah.
So this has been building for a number of years, and I think he immediately saw that it was the benefits of having Bitcoin. And so this is, speaking of this, kind of what's happening, President Bukele is the first Bitcoin president. El Salvador is Bitcoin country. And what did you think of the Bitcoin magazine cover as the cypherpunk-looking founding father of the Orange Party, his op-ed rallying the Bitcoin troops to El Salvador? What was your take?
I mean, his op-ed kind of highlighted in a lot of ways why it's so important for people to actually come and visit El Salvador, be it for adopting Bitcoin or just out of their own curiosity to verify the information that they're seeing out there. I think there's a lot of FUD around what's happening in El Salvador, and the logical instinct of any person that is at least interested a little bit about Bitcoin or would want to explore why did the country like El Salvador decide to take such a step and to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. I think they should definitely pay it a visit and see what's happening in the ground.
Right. Well, it's an excellent opportunity to pay a visit at this event.
Yes, sir.
Coming up in November. And, it's at the Crown Plaza here, not in San Benito, but next door.
Yes, in Escalon. In Colonia Escalon. Yeah.
Okay. And this whole area is like Beverly Hills.
It's the financial district of San Salvador. There is the World Trade Center there. There's a lot of businesses, and yes, it's residential, and it's a fancy area that people wouldn't necessarily expect to see in El Salvador. Funny enough, but it does exist, and it's been around for a while. And it's very there is entrepreneurs, tech entrepreneurs that are right next door to that hotel, and that's why we chose it to be there, because we wanted that connection with the local businesses. We wanted to make sure that they can come and drop by the event whenever they felt like it during the workday. Right,
and the speakers and the presentations, I think, get back to really hardcore Bitcoiners. Like when I went to the first Bitcoin, Stacy and I went to the one in Prague in 2011, and there were no such thing as a Bitcoin celebrity. And I think that recently, some of these conferences, like the big one in Miami, it becomes inundated with these fake celebrities, mostly, who really have taken the focus off what Bitcoin's all about. And I suggested to the organizers they need to have like a conference within a conference just for Bitcoiners, so that all that other stuff can play on some other stage. But here, with your conference, it's Bitcoin only. And let me ask you about this. When the president speaks about building the El Salvador dream, paso a paso, this great rebrand of El Salvador is inspiring other nations in the region to not only consider Bitcoin an economic liberty, but to rebrand and transform similarly. You are from Brazil. What do you see there, and also in this Central American region?
What I can see is a lot of people, when they find out that I'm now in El Salvador and been here for a year, they're very curious to understand how it's working. Obviously, a lot of people are still very much unaware of Lightning and its impact and how it's actually allowing El Salvador to adopt Bitcoin as money.
How?
And so
why is that? How?
Because it's instant settlement, right? It allowed Bitcoin to transform into a medium of exchange, right? And to have this technology that allows for instant settlement between people, right? So being able to make transactions at the very small 1 cent immediately to anybody in the world from El Salvador, that's something that a lot of people have a hard time still wrapping their head around it. And a lot of them don't even know that it exists. And so I think the curiosity is more coming from that. It's like, how the hell are people just waiting around for 10 minutes to accept the payments? And it's mostly that, but they also know that they're seeing the approval rating of the president, and they're seeing the positive impact that it's having on the country with the numbers that were published recently in the op-ed of Nayib Bukele. And they can't help but feel a little bit jealous of what's going on here, and they want it for themselves. They want it in their own countries. And
The halo effect.
Exactly.
They're like, wow, this is really working out.
Yeah.
So Lightning is that second layer for instantaneous settlement, which is appropriate for business people on the street. They can get paid immediately without having to go onto the main chain there and waiting for various confirmations. So this is really transformative. So you were in Brazil and you moved here because of Bitcoin.
Actually, I was in Canada.
Oh, okay. Wow, this is getting interesting.
So I was born in Brazil. I lived for a while in Canada, and I grew up in Libya as well. My parents are Palestinian, so I'm quite from all over the world. So I think that's why I connected with Bitcoin in a way, because of that background. But the reason why I decided to move here is for many reasons. It's, first of all, because out of my own curiosity, I had the opportunity to help organize this conference. It was a generous offer, I would say, by Galloy, and so that's why I came down here. And it was just it was hard to say no to that kind of initiative, right? And so yeah. So.
Well, you obviously Brazilian. You love the beaches and everything, and there's plenty here for beach lovers. Do you surf?
I don't. Actually.
You don't surf.
No,
Okay, I'll move on. I'll just not go down that path. So,
Chimbeiro has been pestering me to learn, but I'll get there
he
eventually.
pesters everybody.
I know.
Wherever we met this guy, he's like, "Can we teach you how to surf?" Really? Do I need it? Yes.
Yeah, I think I'll take him up on that offer this weekend. But yeah.
He another convert. Stacy got up the first time. She's surfing.
Oh wow.
She did it so well. She didn't go back. She just proved it. Like she went off in a halo of surfing greatness. All right. So the opposition have called Bitcoiners neo-colonialists and economic hitman. What is your response to that, aside from laughing hysterically? Do Bitcoiners extract wealth or bring wealth?
I mean, that's sort of. I had this conversation with Stacy at some point in a lunch together. I told her, listen, colonials, when they came to Latin America, they wanted to extract the gold. Bitcoiners are coming with the gold, right? And that's the difference between, and that's what people are having a hard time kind of wrapping their head around it. We're not here to extract anything from El Salvador. As Bitcoiners, we're here to spend the hardest form of money in the country that would accept it, hoping that people will not turn around and sell it right away, right? And that they would keep it for themselves and for the future generations, so that we can have the impact that we're hoping Salvadorians can benefit of from 5 years from now, right? So, yeah, I laugh about this.
Yeah,
these
I
kind
love
of comments.
that.
I mean, it's so ridiculous.
I love what you're saying there. They're not taking the gold; they're bringing the gold.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And, you can't say it better than that. So I'm going to wrap it up. And the conference is November 15th and 17th. Max and Stacy, of course, will be there. I think I might be even speaking at this event.
You
I'm not
have
sure.
to be speaking at
Am
this
I?
event.
I
Yeah,
never
of
know.
course.
You never know.
Of
People
course.
are not sure if I'm going to keep my clothes on or what's going on. I mean, it's crazy. So it's in the Crown Plaza Hotel in San
Correct.
Salvador. Our tickets are still available.
Yes, tickets are available. So the event has been generously sponsored by Bitfinex, and amongst other sponsors, there is tracks for everybody that will suit all tastes, all different, levels of familiarity with Bitcoin. So if you're new to it, or you've been around since 2001, it doesn't matter. You'll still find a topic that will interest you. We have two main stages, Dev and Econ. So the Dev will cover everything technology related, and then the Econ will cover everything that is non-technical. There's a solution stage so that people can chill their product as much as they want, and there is 6 workshop rooms that will cover everything from, how to build a seed signer all the way to, how to review the Bitcoin core, and really dive deep into any topic that people fancy. And there will be fun parties in the evening, of course, as well.
Yeah.
Right? So,
No, you gotta
you
have
know, it
fun
won't
parties.
be all serious business. We'll have some drinks.
Good enough. All right, Noor of Galoy, thanks for being on Max and Stacy Report.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of Max and Stacy Report. I want to thank Noor from Galoy, our special guest. Until next time, bye, y'all.